Good evening, everyone. My name is Ken Mejia-Beal, and I'm the chair of the Democratic Party of DuPage County. And tonight we have a special guest for our chair chat, our comptroller, Susana Mendoza, who is awesome. And we are just privileged to have her here. Hello, Comptroller Mendoza. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing well. I'm looking for, I think I lost my video here. Hold on one second, Ken. Right there, right? That one. All right, am I back on? There we go.
There you go.
Okay, I just swapped to a little bit better of a camera, but I look pretty bright. I have my awesome assistant husband here. I'm calling him, he's my assistant right now. Who is going to get me situated for this fun night together with a glass of wine, which I don't have yet, but will be coming shortly. And so if you're watching at home, I hope you too, whoa, David, it's going. You too can feel comfortable enough to open up a glass of your favorite thing to drink and join us. But I'm happy to be here with you tonight. I know a lot of you just signed on. You missed the dramatics of a few minutes ago, but I just told Ken that I've had a heck of a day. This is why I'm looking forward to this glass of wine. I found out today my brother who lives at home with us, actually, he was scheduled for surgery and he started, he's been extremely fatigued and stuff because he has 3 days of dialysis a week, given that back in November 2020, he came down with COVID. It almost killed him. He's a Chicago police officer and he spent 72 days hospitalized, lost both his kidneys, had 5 strokes in his brain, and he's had the need to have lots of surgeries since then, specifically related to like his dialysis needs. But he started feeling kind of, a little cough and again, a sore throat, and he's in the hospital yesterday and today, and he does have COVID again, which is just probably the last thing we wanted to hear. But so a little down in spirits today, but I think this is probably the perfect thing I need to like lift me up, is talking to great people, especially out in Blue Page, right? Because it's not DuPage anymore. And I will remind you, many of you may not know this, but I'm a DuPage girl. I went to Willow Creek Elementary School from 2nd grade through 6th grade, and I loved every little bit of it. I have so many fond memories of my times at what is now no longer the Hobson Pool. We were members of Hobson Pool. I heard it's gone now, which is kind of depressing, but I lived on 7200 59th Street, I think was my address. And there's a little cul-de-sac at the end with a little creek, and just some of my best friends for my whole entire life were from that period of my life in 2nd grade through 6th grade. So I have nothing but awesome memories about living in Woodridge, Illinois from that period of my life. And so whenever I'm in DuPage, and also when I'm in Will County, I know there's kind of a rivalry there, but I went to high school and junior high in Bolingbrook. So I might be the only statewide constitutional who has lived in 3 of the most populous counties in Illinois. And it's always fun to remind people of
that. Well, thank you for sharing. I'm just going to jump right in.
Let's do it.
Yes. So even our more informed electorate may not fully understand what it is your office does for us here in Illinois. Can you go into a little detail about what your role within our state government is exactly?
Sure. Well, thanks for the question. I do think no matter where I am and no matter how hard I work and no matter how good of a job we think we do in getting the word out about our really important work, and no matter where I go, I do sometimes ask, more often than not, how many people in this room even know what the controller does, right? Or what is a controller? And you would not be surprised to know that a lot of people probably have no clue. And so that is really a perfect question to start off our dialogue tonight with. So in Illinois, we have 2 financial officers. We have a controller, and we have the more common term that people hear about, which is treasurer. Now, not all states have both controller or a treasurer. Not all states have elected controllers or treasurers. Some states do have both. Some states have just a controller, and other states have just a treasurer. Some are appointed, a combo of appointed and elected. But here in Illinois, 2 totally independently elected financial officers. The state treasurer, who is Michael Frericks, his job is to invest the state's money. Very different job from the controller. The controller doesn't invest the state's money. The controller pays the state's bills and manages all of the state's fiscal accounts. And you might wonder, why do we have two financial offices? Well, back in 1965, and this being Illinois, you may not unfortunately be shocked to know that the person who had the duties of both the controller and the treasurer, and as well, actually, believe it or not, the auditor general. So we now have an auditor general, a treasurer, and a controller. But back in 1965, it was just one person who did those duties. And so the person who had access to the checkbook, right, like in this case today, the controller, also had access to the direct funds that the state could potentially invest, which would be the treasurer. The person with the checkbook and the money being the same person who happened to be super corrupt was not a good formula for taxpayers. The gentleman's name was Orville Hodge. And if you want to Google him, you will see that back then he embezzled over $6 million, which today would be closer to $60 million of Illinois taxpayer dollars. So like the present value of that is close to $60 million in today's, present value money. So it was a really massive embezzlement at the time. And so he was found guilty, went to prison for it. But because of that experience is that the legislature, when they had their constitutional convention in 1970, decided to officially create two separate financial offices to create a strong system of internal controls and checks and balances, where never again could you have the person who has access to the immediate funds have access to the checkbook or the ability to embezzle. Now you might think, well, it's the modern day, right? Ever since computers and all that stuff, it's easier to keep track of things and for that not to be so easy to do. But I'll remind you that just recently in 2012, hold on a second. Mami, estoy grabando algo, por favor. Sí. This is live TV, folks. Anyway, where was I in this? Oh, 2012, Rita Crundwell. I mean, raise your hand if you remember the name Rita Crundwell. She's from Dixon, Illinois, and she was, you got this right, both the treasurer and the controller functions in one office, right? And Miss Crundwell was known for having lots of horses, and the people of Dixon thought that she was just independently wealthy because she owned all these beautiful show horses and these multi-million-dollar trailers and stuff like that. And they all thought she made her money in the racing industry, but it turns out she was able to buy all those amazing horses and the multi-million-dollar trailers and live this luxurious lifestyle, not because she was independently wealthy, but because she embezzled $54 million from the people of the small town of Dixon, Illinois. Now, again, because there was no system of internal controls, making sure that the person with the access to the checkbook didn't have immediate access to the cash. And so for those folks, and you'll hear lots of people say that we should just consolidate the office of controller into the treasurers and save a few bucks on salaries. I will tell you it's a terrible idea because there is an important reason why these offices were created to be strong safety nets from future potential embezzlements, strong internal controls, checks and balances. It really wouldn't save much money anyway. You're talking maybe a few salaries for the principal itself and a couple chiefs of staffs, potentially, maybe a few lawyers, but our duties are very different. One's dealing with investments, another is a totally separate financial officer type duties. And so from my perspective, I think it's a bad idea, but more importantly, the rating agencies have already told us that they would see any loss of internal controls as a reason to go credit negative for our state. So you think about maybe you save a few $1,000s on some salaries that you could get rid of, but it could cost us hundreds of millions of dollars in additional borrowing costs if our credit were to slip even one little tiny bit. It just doesn't make fiscal sense. It sounds like a great political talking point, consolidate, people love hearing that. But in this case, we need to remember that the two largest government embezzlement schemes in the history of the United States of America both happened in the state of Illinois, where the treasurer and the controller were the same person. So, unfortunately, we haven't been able to get this right in Illinois with everyone doing one job. It's really important to protect taxpayer dollars. My role as controller is I'm the state's chief fiscal officer and accountability officer, and I make sure that all of the state's bills get paid, and that we are managing the state's finances in the most responsible way forward.
Thank you. I have learned so much within these last 2 minutes. Thank you. I had no idea, so I've been educated. So thank you so much. Something you mentioned that I actually want to jump into is credit rating. So in 2016, you were sworn into office amidst some of our worst fiscal crises. We were with Governor Rauner, and our budget was at an impasse. So since then, Illinois has received not one, but two credit upgrades under your leadership. So thank you. We appreciate that. But can you please explain what the credit rating upgrade means for working families here in Illinois? When they hear you talk about the credit upgrade, what does that mean to us?
Sure. Well, it means taxpayers pay less when the government needs to access capital in the markets. So anytime the state of Illinois has to do, for example, a bond deal, or they issue government bonds in exchange for cash. And those are things that we do, for example, with the capital plan, right? We sell bonds, and then that's how you finance these big projects at the state level. But sometimes, if, let's say, we have an economic emergency, and we saw this during the course of the pandemic, where we had a gigantic hole blown in our state's budget, and then we needed to go to the market and borrow funds, right? And so in that case, every time you go to borrow funds from the market, you're paying a premium on what it would cost somebody with good credit. You're paying more because it costs more to borrow money when you have bad credit. So the easiest way to explain this is just like a normal person at home, right? Forget about like the huge state and billions of dollars. Just you at home. It's important that you protect your credit rating, right? And you do whatever you can to make sure that your credit rating is close to 800 as possible, right? If you have a $500 500 credit rating and you try to get a car loan, it's going to cost you way many more percentage points than it would if you have an 800 credit rating. So 800 credit rating, they're just dying to like get you to like take a car at 0% interest. But if you have a 500 credit rating, you might not even be able to find credit. And if you do, it'll cost you 12, 13, 15%, right? Which is essentially like buying another car. So in Illinois, every time we can move even a little bit in the right direction with the improved credit, that is a huge deal for taxpayers. Because remember, when we say that the government is spending this, or the government is borrowing that, the government is like a fancy word for you, the taxpayers. It's not, Governor Rauner, who had to pay back the bill backlog or the interest payments that accrued because of his financial, mismanagement of our state. I mean, I would feel better about it if that 1.104 billion in late payment interest penalties that he is responsible for had to have been paid back by Governor Rauner himself. But no, he left Illinois, and he's in one of his 10 mansions somewhere, I think in Florida these days. But point is, he doesn't give our state a second thought. But who got stuck with the tab for 1.104 billion in late payment interest penalties? The government. And when you think of the government, it's really taxpayers. All of you, everyone on this call, all of us have to pay that back. And that's what really stinks about this whole process. And so for me as controller, when I try to talk about these big issues, financial issues, and I really try to remind people, this isn't the government's money, it's your money. And you're giving us the responsibility and the trust to manage it as best as possible. And so I always really keep that front and center in my mind, that this isn't play money, it's not monopoly money. Every single penny of revenue that we have in our state came through the hard work of the people of the state. And so we have to do everything we can to honor that and to protect it and to stretch its value for the greatest return on investment every single day, right? So that's how I think about it. And when I think about, like, for example, Ken, the $16.7 billion backlog that Bruce Rauner created in just a 2-year period, this is essentially what I walked into as controller. He more than tripled the backlog that he inherited from the Quinn administration, which was still really bad. I mean, it was about $5 billion when he took office. So it's not like the governor walked into a beautiful setting. Right. Governor Rauner did already inherit a backlog, but he more than tripled it in just 2 years. And that is unconscionable considering the fact that he managed the state during the best economic bull market of our lifetime and led the state to 8 consecutive credit downgrades, again, during the strongest economy ever. So to get 8 consecutive credit downgrades took us just one level above junk bond status. And so people understand this at home. If we were to actually have crossed that threshold into junk bond status, the majority of the people who right now under the law are able to buy debt from the state, or invest essentially in the state's bonds, they would not be allowed to do so moving forward. And the only entities who would be allowed under the law to take that kind of risk would be like the top tier hedge fund managers, who then it costs us a lot more to sell these bonds because the interest that we would be paying on them would be a very high risk interest. So I don't know if I've lost you guys on this because it's kind of complex, but this is what I kept accusing Governor Rauner of, that he was destroying our state's finances on purpose, because there is no way to explain 8 consecutive credit downgrades during the best economic bull market of our lifetime, unless if you were intentionally trying to destroy the state's finances. And at that point, you'd have to ask yourself, well, why? Follow the money. When our finances get worse, the returns on investing in risky ventures improve for the people at the highest rungs of the economic stratosphere. And those just happen to be a lot of his friends. So, you know, I would challenge him to prove me wrong on that, but I know that that's what happened in our state, and it's really unconscionable. And that's why it's really important to make sure that you're sending people to work for government that actually care about the state of Illinois, care about people, and care about protecting people's tax dollars. And so I couldn't be prouder to tell you, Ken, that when we talk about these credit ratings, it makes a big difference, because the difference between 1 percentage point or half a percentage point could be hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars in the long run for taxpayers saved. This is what we're working towards. People get excited about a lot of things these days. I get most excited about the prospect of a credit upgrade. Why? Because it saves you money, and I feel good every time I can tell taxpayers that we're saving them money.
Well, I just want to jump in because I want to touch on something you mentioned, but if this whole political thing doesn't work for you, you'd be a great econ professor, because you explain this so perfectly. It's very easy to follow. So something you talked about was the backlog, and in my opinion, 2 of your biggest accomplishments, and really the true showmanship that shows the great leadership that you have, are getting our bill backlog down and faster payment cycles to our state vendors. Can you please explain how the reduced bill backlog and faster vendor payment cycles, I should say, benefit Illinoisans?
Sure, that's an awesome question. Let me walk you back to when I took office. The average payment cycle, and that means how quickly the state of Illinois is paying a bill that it receives from a vendor, right? So you contract with the state, you send in your invoice for the services that you already rendered to the state. Then that state agency that you contracted with would send, once they review your invoice and they approve it, they would send it to the controller's office for payment, right? So the average wait time for a vendor at that time when I became controller was about 210 business days. That's like 10 and a half months in real time. So when you say, how does that impact Illinoisans, right? If you're a vendor doing business with the state, I have a secret admirer coming in here. Say hi.
Hello.
Say hi.
Hello.
Say hi, DuPage County.
Hi, DuPage.
Okay, I'm talking.
Hola, mami.
Hola, mi amor. Okay. So, if it takes 210 days to get paid and you've provided a service and you're a small business, right? How many small businesses do you know could actually survive with their normal cash flow without having to take out loans to stay open, because they can weather waiting 10 and a half months to get paid by a state for services that they rendered almost a year ago, right? Most people can't. And so when you think about what did this mean for people, I would say it's not just the vendor, although the vendor in and of itself, if that were the only entity, that would be bad enough, right? Because you're talking about somebody who signed a contract with the state, provided services dutifully, and then was turned into an unwilling lender to the state of Illinois, right? Because people just want to get paid for their services. They don't want to wait almost a year or more at times. And then, but it's a trickle down effect, right? So like the vendor itself, the business owner is harmed, but what does that mean? That means that if they're not getting paid, they're going to have a hard time paying their employees. If their employees aren't getting paid, what do? They have to quit because why? They have to feed their families. And then they have to look for other jobs. And then what happens to that business when it can't make its payroll and it starts to lose its employees? It's likely going to fail. And this was happening all over the state of Illinois during especially those close to 3 years of the budget impasse under Bruce Rauner. Now, having said that, that's on the business side, which was terrible and it was devastating. But now what if you're a business, and remember, non-for-profits are businesses, right? They're just non-for-profit businesses. Many of our non-for-profits, they're the absolute front lines of taking care of the most vulnerable people in Illinois. And so when you have a non-for-profit that treats children with autism, yet they're not being paid for a year or two, or you're a domestic violence shelter that literally went 3 years without funding under the Rauner administration because they were not being paid, what happens? You know, women will literally die, right? Because they're not going to have services that are being available to them, because if you can't pay your employees, they're going to quit, and you're going to have a skeleton crew if you're lucky enough to even have that. And so you're talking about children who didn't get services to autism, children whose parents had to pay out of pocket for speech therapy because speech therapists weren't getting paid for about 10 months. And what if you're a senior citizen in a nursing home or in hospice care? Well, when I became controller, the average wait time for them was about 9 months to get paid. The most vulnerable people in our state had to wait over 9 months because of the prior administration putting them at the back of the line and putting high-priced technology consultants at the very front of the line, speed paying them and slow paying the vulnerable people, people with disabilities, people who had children or adults that needed care, who had disabilities. It was completely morally corrupt and just so wrong on so many levels. So, you know, this concept of having to wait for an eternity to get paid was crippling the social safety net, the entire safety net here in Illinois, and it was also putting a lot of people out of business. The irony being that you had a governor who called himself pro-business, who really did more to destroy business growth in Illinois than any other governor, probably all other governors combined. So this is what it means when you think about what does the vendor payment cycle mean. Now, today, we've now gone from a 210-day business payment cycle when I became controller to my oldest bill. The oldest bill that I have in my shop today is 15 days old. And by the way, we have paid down that $16.7 billion bill backlog to, I've essentially gotten rid of the bill backlog. I mean, we keep calling it bill backlog, but I'm going to start calling it our general funds accounts payable, because we are paying our bills on time now. We have I have the fastest vendor payment cycle in over 20 years in the controller's office today. And I paid down the bill backlog from 16.7 to what today's 3.7, which is the normal cost of doing business when you're paying your bills under 30 days. And I did it, by the way, without utilizing any federal stimulus funds to do so, right? And that's something that as Democrats, we should be super proud to tell that story, because you're going to hear the other side say, well, of course, you know, Mendoza paid down the bill backlog because she got a boatload of money in federal stimulus funds. We haven't touched that money for utilization of bill payments. I have started paying the bill backlog down since before Governor Pritzker even became governor. I had knocked $9 billion off of it. When I was fighting Rauner, you might recall those days, Ken, when I was very actively taking them on every day, kind of fighting out of my weight class, but I did it for Illinois and it was fun to do and it was effective. And I shamed him and forced him into doing a bond deal that he vetoed in the budget, but it was overridden. And we were able to, when you think about the credit rating and how it affects us, right? You said, what does that mean? Saving money. At that time, we were paying 12% interest on almost $17 billion worth of late bills. The bond deal that I wanted to do was able to reduce the interest rate from 12% to 3.5%.
Wow.
But imagine this, that taking it from 12 to 3.5 is going to save taxpayers between $4 and $6 billion in reduced interest rates, right? That delta between the 12% and the 6%, even with the 12-year loan, we're still saving a ton of money. It's kind of like you at home, if you were paying 12% on your mortgage and you can get a refi at 3.5, that would be like you hit the lotto, right? But imagine when you're talking billions of dollars. So the thing about that is that 3.5% was the best rate that we could get because our credit was so bad. If we had been a state with good credit rating, we might have gotten 2% or 1.5%, and that would have been billions more that we could have saved over the life of the 12-year loan. So 3.5% was still amazing given how bad our credit was. But every time our credit gets even a little bit better, the cost of doing deals like that is better for Illinois, right? You understand what I'm saying?
Right.
So,
Yes.
so you know, today having gone from a 210-day average wait to my oldest bill being 15 days old is a remarkable turnaround in a very short amount of time. And it's especially awesome considering that those other guys got 8 credit downgrades during the best economic times. And I've helped lead our state to 2 credit upgrades during a global pandemic and the worst fiscal crisis that happened even before the pandemic. You know, you like to think about the pandemic and what this virus has caused. And I just told you, it has devastated my family with what my brother's been going through, and it's changed all our lives. But the worst virus to ever hit Illinois' finances was not coronavirus. I mean, I've managed to stay beautifully through this pandemic. The worst virus to hit our finances was actually Bruce Rauner. And I really felt that I wasn't scared to tackle the pandemic, because if I could get through those 2 years of Bruce Rauner and still bring down our bill backlog by $9 billion, no thanks to him, I knew that no matter what else was thrown my way, we could handle it. You know, it was like, oh, just a virus? That's nothing. If I could deal with this guy, Illinois is going to be fine, right? Now, the funny part of that is that every other state controller that I've spoken to when the pandemic hit, they were all freaking out because every state was riding this like incredible economy for years. They didn't have a self-inflicted financial crisis. And so when the pandemic hit, all of a sudden people who had been enjoying this wonderful period of economic, you know, largesse, they were like, oh my gosh, how do you deal with this? What's this going to do to us? But I had felt like I've only experienced being controller under crisis. So this to me was actually nowhere near as scary or difficult to manage as it was under Rauner. And I will give Governor Pritzker credit that he's been a partner in helping keep the state moving in the right direction instead of an obstacle the way Rauner was when he was there.
Wow. So I want to go back a little bit, if it's okay with you. I want to go back about 22 years. In 2000, 22 years, you were, I believe, the youngest member of the Illinois General Assembly.
At that time, not
at that time.
Alan Dixon was actually 21 when he got elected. But yes, I was 27 years old. I was the youngest member in the chamber. I had some members who said they had shoes older than me and some that said they had socks older than me. So I went to school for, especially because I got involved so young. And at the time, there was really no one in my age range in Illinois that I could have looked to and said, oh, if he did it or she did it, I could do it, right? Like everybody was way older than I was. And so, and I never, ever thought I would ever be a politician. That's just the truth. In college, they always ask you, where do you see yourself over the next 5 years? I saw myself working in an ad firm, making cool commercials. That I went to school for business and marketing and advertising concentration, and that's what I wanted to do. I never took a single poli-sci course in college. I was not politically active or engaged. I don't say that as a source of pride, because I think it's awesome when I meet young people who are the complete opposite of what I was at that age. But I come from an immigrant family where my parents left Mexico and their entire lives had distrusted politicians and government, right? And so I grew up kind of thinking that everyone was corrupt and everyone was bad and no one should be trusted and they're never going to work hard for you. They're only going to work hard for themselves. And so I had this very jaded mentality about politicians. So why on earth would I want to be one, right?
Right.
But but I always though wanted to give back to the community. I didn't see that as like being a politician. I saw that as just public service, and it's what good people do when they have good things happen in their lives, right? So even though my parents never ever thought that they'd have a daughter who would end up in politics, they have always inculcated this thought that public service is important, right? Volunteering, working with youth. And I was an athlete my whole entire life. I know what soccer did for me in terms of, discipline and leadership and teamwork and, developing your own skill sets, but learning how to work with others and get the most out of your team for a common goal, right? All of these things that sports taught me in soccer specifically. And I had a passion for just young people and kids. And so when I was born in Chicago, that was 1972. So I'm taking you back now 49 years.
Let's go.
That was, I was born in Little Village, and it's an awesome neighborhood, but it struggles with massive gang violence. And my oldest brother, the one who's sick now, he's always wanted to be a Chicago police officer since he could walk and talk. And it's just, he was a teenager when I was 8 years old. We're 8 years apart. And so it's just a bad mix to be a teenager in a gang infested neighborhood who's only wanted to be a cop, right? So we were always living in fear of something bad happening to us because of all the threats from the gangs and the constant recruitment tactics. And, I don't remember what it was like to walk to school without thinking that I could get shot, right? And so I always had that in the back of my head. So it's like, hurry up and get to school and hurry up and get back home. And I don't have one single memory of playing outside of my house when I lived in the neighborhood. I only have memories of playing in my backyard with my brothers, and they were great memories. I mean, don't get me wrong. I don't want to sound like I had a traumatic childhood, but I didn't realize that it actually is kind of traumatic, until later. And so, so this concept that this is just, kids survive, right? Instead of thriving. And so there was an individual who was actually shot dead right outside our door. And when that happened, my mom and dad, my mom specifically said, this is it, we're done. Because she really did kind of have like PTSD. It wasn't a term back then, but she was really traumatized about what was going to happen to her kids. And she was done with that. So my parents, who were poor, they were working poor, but they worked their butts off, but barely made ends meet. They didn't have the resources to leave town, but they did. They literally, put whatever they could together. The next day, they went to Bolingbrook in our station wagon. They packed up our station wagon with their kids, and we drove to, not Bolingbrook, to Woodridge, Illinois, where my dad had a friend that he worked with at Brock's Candy, who had a friend who was renting a house in Woodridge, which is, of course, DuPage County. And so we moved overnight to this place that we rented for a few years, 2nd through 6th grade. And I swear, it was like all of a sudden you wake up in Pleasantville, right? I didn't know that term until I was an adult, and I saw this TV thing, Pleasantville, and I was like, oh, it's just like ding. I'm like, that is what it was like for me to go from this, I'm fearful, to I am not fearful of anything out here. But just to give you an example, it was a whole year before my mom still let us play outside of the house, in front of the house. But after that year and this comfort level that, okay, our kids aren't going to get shot playing outside, is when I really kind of learned what it was like to be a kid and grow up as a kid should grow up, and know what it's like to play outside until the street lights come on, right? And you hear the whistle from your parents that dinner's ready or something, and make friends, right? Be able to socialize in this healthy way with kids other than your siblings. And so when you ask me, why did I get involved? Maybe I never realized that was the path that my life was taking me eventually, but it kind of was, because I always knew that I never saw myself as a politician, but I always knew that I wanted to, here's the main thing, I wanted to come back to the neighborhood that I had been run out of as a kid. And I even though I was scared to be in that neighborhood as a kid, and then I realized as I got older how lucky I was to live in a neighborhood where all I had to worry about was getting good grades. And, I had opportunities to play things like intramural soccer or travel soccer and have all these awesome experiences and a good public education. these are the things that as you get older, you really start to appreciate. And the sacrifices that my mom and dad did, working multiple jobs and on the weekends and taking turns so that one of them was always with us. It was really hard, of course, on their marriage. They were together until my dad passed away, 33 years, happily married, but probably not as happily as they could have been, given that they didn't see each other as much as they would have wanted to, right? But they did what they had to do, and that was the example that I grew up with. And so I always knew that someday, when I was old enough, when I went to college and graduated, I would, upon graduation, move back to Little Village. That was my goal, because I wanted other kids to know that it wasn't my choice to leave the neighborhood, but it was going to be my choice to come back and stand up to the gangs and show people that, once you make it, and to me, making it was literally graduating college and being able to stand up on my own 2 feet, right? And be self-sufficient in that respect, that I was going to try to be an example for other kids, coming back into the neighborhood. And that interaction, getting to become really active with children, starting a little kids organization in the ward that I lived in, is what kind of landed me in this situation where I met a politician, and then one thing leads to another, and next thing you know, a couple of years later, I'm running for office, and I'm inspired to run against the state representative who I felt was on the complete polar opposite ideologically of the spectrum that I was. And I thought, well, I'm not happy, and it's not enough to complain, and it's not enough to volunteer with kids and be that example. If you really want to set the example, then run for office where you have the ability to have the power that it takes to pass legislation or to influence policy in a way that you can really make a difference in people's lives. And so that's how I got started in politics, never wanting to be a politician, but getting exposed to it in the neighborhood and saying, wow, I can do a lot as a volunteer, and it's awesome. And for some people, that's going to be great and more than enough. But I could do even more if I, take on the risk of running for office and not being afraid to do so. And maybe if I'm lucky enough and people trust me enough and they give me a chance, I might be able to make a difference for some other kids. And so for me, I'm super excited to see how many young people are serving in the legislature today. They get younger and younger every year. That's super awesome. And they're doing great things, right? And so who would have thought that this kid who, went from Little Village to Woodridge to Bolingbrook back to Little Village, now I'm married and have a son, and we live in Portage Park, and he goes to a CPS school, that, I'd be controller someday. I mean, I never would have, not in my wildest imagination would I thought I'd be the first statewide Hispanic woman elected to office, but it's pretty awesome. And I hope that other kids see me and think, yeah, if she could do it, I can too, right? That's pretty cool.
I just want to say, I have another question for you, but what you just said really touched home with me. I'm from Southside 79th and Hermitage myself. I witnessed some drive-bys growing up, no playing outside, and it does change your life. And every year I try to go back to the South Side, and I talk to young people because it's important for them to see where it can end, or not that it's ending, but where it can go and where the future can progress. And you are an embodiment of that. So thank you for sharing, and I 100% can relate. So looking at your 20 plus years at this point of work, from being Little Village's state representative to being the Chicago city clerk to where you are now, what is the legacy that you want for your time spent in public office as such a great public servant?
Well, that's an awesome question. And it's, of course, I don't know that anyone ever knows truly what their legacy, if ideally what it would be, but I would think that, I think of it through the eyes of what I want my son to think about his mom. Right. I mean, and maybe if you would have asked me before I was a mom, what my legacy what I would want it to be, it might be different than it is today. But, part of it is that when my son gets older and I'm no longer around and he has kids, and they're old enough to understand, I would love for him to just be so proud of the work that his mom did and boast to his kids, my grandkids, right? Hopefully, if I'm blessed someday, about what a badass his mom was and how she was unafraid to take on the biggest challenges. And most importantly, that his mom wasn't show, she was substance. I really want people, if they think about me in no other way, it's like, holy cow, that girl, when she said she was going to do something, she underpromised and over delivered, right? I want people to think that Mendoza, she gets done, you know? And
Yes.
so when people, like when I was running for controller, people who loved me, close people to me, my closest advisors, people that have been with me for a long time who have seen me go up the ranks and stuff, and family that always worry about you, they were like, are you crazy? Like, why would you want to run for controller? Seriously, what the hell is a controller? All I know about Illinois is that their finances are like horrendous. You've got this insane governor who doesn't want to work with anyone, including members of his own party. The state's finances have never been worse. There's complete gridlock. They don't even have a budget. Why would you want to be controller? That's got to be the worst job anyone could run for in Illinois, right?
Right.
And I was like, that's exactly why I want to run for controller. Because honestly, Ken, you know me by now, right? You know that there's like nothing that I love more than a big, fat, delicious plate full of problems that I get to sink my teeth into, that people are like, there is no way that will ever get better. It's like an impossible task, right?
Right.
And I'm like, hell no, nothing is impossible, right? Nothing is impossible. And, impossible might take a little bit longer, but it's not impossible. I don't feel anything is impossible. And the more impossible somebody tells me that a challenge is, the more I want to prove them wrong, right? And that's how I want to spend my life. It's not truly like really thinking that things are impossible, but like when I ran for controller and there's a, at that time it was like 8, 9 and growing $1 billion bill backlog. And you had people saying, you should just give up on Illinois. Illinois is never going to be able to recover from that financial hole that we've dug for ourselves. There was efforts in Washington to allow Illinois to literally go bankrupt. People were saying you should just invest in U-Haul and move. Illinois is going to be the next Detroit. These are all things that I'm sure you heard many times over.
Many
and
times.
I just kept thinking, no, Illinois is awesome. You should never give up on Illinois. And you just need to send me there to fix things. And so I know that if I get the opportunity, I can fix things. And so I have to tell you that when you think about a legacy, I would love for people to think that I did what everyone else thought was impossible. And I don't think anything's impossible, whether it's paying down the bill backlog, which I've already done, check, right? Whether it's, dealing with the unfunded pension liability that everyone thinks is impossible. No, it's not. We could totally fix it, and we will, right? So like none of these things scare me. What scares me is the thought that people aren't going to take the risks that need to be taken to fix things because they're afraid of taking risks. And I'm clearly not that person. So, I would love that in the future when I'm not around and people think about my legacy, they see me not necessarily as a fearless fighter, but as a brave citizen who stepped up, not during the best of times, but during the worst of times and did what everyone thought was impossible.
Well, as an Illinoisan, thank you for not giving up on us. And
never, baby. Woo!
Thank you. And I can collectively say we appreciate the work you've done. And I'm pretty sure your son will remember you as a badass when he talks about your legacy. So,
well, thank you. The other day I did some interview. I don't know who I was interviewing with, like on a phone call or maybe it was a Zoom. I don't know. And he was sitting by the kitchen. And then when I hung up or when I ended the thing, he's only 9 and it was so cute. And he just goes out of the blue. He goes, you know what, Mommy? I wish everybody knew the amazing stuff you do for our state. And I was like, oh man, that is awesome. It wasn't coached. It was like straight out of the heart. And it was like, you don't know what that meant to me to have him say that, because you don't think he's paying attention. He's playing on his video game or whatever. But when I ended it, that's what he said. And I just thought that is just super cool. And I have to make sure that I stay focused so that every day my son thinks my mom is like a superhero and she walks out that door is to try to save Illinois. When he was little, he'd say, why do you have to leave? I'm like, because I have to go save Illinois. And he'd be like, okay, go save Illinois, And so I just feel like that's really ingrained in his mindset that like mommy's somehow some superhero that I have to fix all the finances and manage the money, and that really means something. And it does. It really
It
truly does.
does.
And so having a little 9-year-old at home that is kind of keeping you, more honest than anything in the world could, because I have to look at myself and the legacy and the reputation that I want to leave as one that is completely untarnished for my son and his kids. And if I can live up to that ideal for myself, then, our state's going to be better off.
I agree. I 100% agree. And I just have one more question for you. And it's something you kind of touched on. This is a fun one. So because I consider anybody that saves us money a hero, but if you could be any superhero for a day, which one would it be and why?
Oh man, that's so hard because I totally am into superheroes. I am.
Okay.
Like my husband's not so much. He's like, oh, another superhero movie. And I'm like, oh, they're so great. I love all
I'll
of
go
them.
with you. Next time I'll go.
Seriously. All right. Well, he still goes. I mean, he sees them, but he's not like, he'd rather see some like, more Oscar worthy performance. I'm like just totally happy suspending disbelief. And, I'm like, cool, awesome. You lifted the world with a finger. But I don't know. I really don't know that. I was always obsessed as a little girl with Wonder Woman, right? I mean, of course. Plus I had the whole underoos. I don't know if you're old enough to remember underoos, but I had the whole like Wonder Woman underoo outfit. There might be some women on this call.
Okay. It's going above my head, but I know somebody gets it.
I bet if you Google underoos, you'll find something. But underoos were like a pajama, kind of like really kind of skimpy stuff, but they were for kids. It was like little pajama outfits of like the superheroes. So like the boys had Spider-Man, Batman, the traditional ones. And Wonder Woman was like the one for the girls. And I used to love her. Plus she had like the lasso of truth and stuff. And Wonder Woman these days is a total badass. But then I also like the superheroes that don't have actual superpowers, but they're just super badasses, right? Like Black Widow. Or she's way more conflicted than I am. I mean, I don't have any kind of like past or anything like that, but it's still kind of cool to see that you've got real people who take on these like totally extraordinary roles, right? Because correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think she has any like innate superpowers, right?
No, she doesn't.
She's just a badass fighter.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I'd love to be invisible, which maybe seems a little weird because people might think that's kind of sketchy, I guess, but you'd love to be a fly on some of the walls that, you hear people having conversations, right? But I don't know. I just, I know I'm never going to be a superhero. So you have to try to live like if you were a superhero for the people that love you and respect you the most, right? And so you do what you can with whatever powers God gave you, and you try to do more than what you think you can. And if you do that, then hey, everybody who does that in my mind is a superhero. So
if I had to pick one for you, now that I know that you are very well versed in superheroes, I would actually pick Jean Grey for you. Simply, I would see, and you get it. It's because you can, with your mind, you can do so much, and you've accomplished so much just with your mind and your might. So that would be my pick for you.
Well, thank you. That's so cool. Who would you want to be? I'm curious.
Who? Me? Well, Wolverine, of course.
Oh, really? You know why I wouldn't want to be Wolverine? Because I feel like it would hurt for those things to shoot out of his hands. They do kind of hurt.
They do, but he can self-heal. And I think if you can self-heal, you can do anything.
Yeah, but so does Spider-Man. I would rather be Spider-Man. He's super cool.
I have a fear of heights, so I'm going to stay on the ground. I'm going to be Wolverine. I'm going to have the Sharpies, and I'll do it that way. But I just, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for joining us this evening. You have both educated us and entertained us a lot. And we can't wait to have you out back in DuPage. And it's always a pleasure talking to you.
Well, thanks so much. Hey, does anyone else on the call have a question? I'm happy to entertain you.
Anybody.
I was supposed to go to a dinner tonight, but now that I'm like isolated for COVID, I've got a little extra time. So happy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any questions?
I was going to ask, so what is your prediction on the race for the Secretary of State?
I have no idea on that. Okay. I really don't have a good prediction. Giving one would only get me in trouble at this point too.
Yeah.
No, I think it's I think it's like a real toss up right now. So here's my prediction. It will be a Democrat that wins.
Yeah.
I like that answer, and thanks for
Sure
the
as heck
question.
better not be a Republican, I'll tell you that. But
Yeah.
yeah, and I still think it's early. I think you see a lot of momentum right now with Ana Valencia, but you saw a lot of early momentum with Alexi. I do think that anything is possible. There's still a lot of time left, even before the primary, which is so unusual for us, right? Because normally by
Yes.
March this would be decided, and so it's just like an odd year with like where anything can happen at any given moment, right? So, but look, I mean, we've got good people running for that position. And I think it's really critically important that Democrats come out in as huge a numbers as possible and make sure that we keep control of all of the constitutional offices, because they are so critically important. I mean, you see the difference between the prior administration and this administration and how quickly we have turned things around. When you think about this, again, when I started, people are saying we were never going to recover 8 consecutive credit downgrades during the best economic market. It's just unconscionable. But we've actually gotten our first 2 credit upgrades when no other state has been upgraded during the pandemic, right? So this is a sign of Illinois' financial turnaround. And everybody had something to play in that, right? I mean, I feel like I've been, perhaps the lead architect, given that I run the state's finances. But, Governor Pritzker has been a strong partner and an ally. Treasurer Frerichs has as well. Kwame Raoul as well as Attorney General. And, every position, the Secretary of State, Jesse White, who's been like, oh my gosh, he's the most popular politician that will ever have served, right? Not one of the most popular and most beloved. And so, yeah, it's an interesting time because this is the only open seat, and it's going to create a gigantic void. And I know that there's good candidates, but there will never be another Jesse White, right? So this will be an interesting time for all of us who are running, and not just, again, at the constitutional level, which we want to make sure we're still all united Democrats there, because we are making a big difference for people. It's not about us individually. It's about what we do for the people of the state. And I think Democrats care about people, certainly a lot more than the prior Republican administration demonstrated. And so I don't see anything right now on the other side that would give me any level of confidence, even as a very bipartisan member. I'm a proud Democrat, but I think it's really important to work with the other side. But the stuff we're seeing from the other side is not anything we believe, or I certainly believe, would benefit the state of Illinois. So we need to make sure that we're electing Democrats who want to continue the great work that we've started, not just at the constitutional level, but also all the way down to the most local of local seats in the state. The national races, the midterms are typically bad for the party that's got the White House. And,
Right.
Given everything that's happening right now locally and nationally and internationally, right? Those are not things that bode well for our numbers come election day with the midterms. But that's why it's important that we don't give up and we get out there and we bring out every single Democrat that we can, or person who shares our value structure, and tell them how important it is to vote. We cannot afford to lose our congressional seats. We cannot afford to lose any seat in Illinois. And counties like DuPage that have put so much work into finally turning their county from red to blue, we need to continue and double, triple down on that and not take it for granted, right? Took a long time to get there, but remember, it takes one election cycle to go backwards. So we want to continue to fight like our lives depend on it, because honestly, democracy does depend on that. And the quality of life that we experience today is because we do have freedoms that oftentimes we take for granted, I will say, in this country. So let's fight for those.
Yes. Thank
And from one petite woman to another, you're my hero.
Oh, thank you. By the way, I love
See?
your glasses. Those are awesome.
Thank you.
And we have time for one more. And I see Bonnie Garris. You have your hand up, Bonnie. What is your question?
Hi, Bonnie. See you. Now I don't. I see you. Now I
Oh, Bonnie, you're on mute.
But now I hear you. Now I don't. There you go.
Sorry about that. I have a question. Down the road, do you think you'll run for anything else? U.S. Senate or representative? Do you have any aspirations for further down the road?
Oh, sometimes I feel like I'm running for my life, Bonnie, but I will
Okay.
tell you one thing at a time. I am running for reelection as controller, and then we'll see what opportunities make sense. If there's an opportunity for me to serve in a greater capacity where I can do even more good, I'm certainly open to it. I think you should always be, right? But there's still a lot of work that I want to do as controller, and that's why I'm like very enthusiastically running for reelection as that, and then we'll see what the future holds. But I hope if I do that, you'll be there for me.
You bet.
We all will.
Thanks, Jen.
We all will.
Thank you,
So
Bonnie.
thank you, Bonnie, and thank you all for joining us for another chair chat. Thank you so much for joining us, Comptroller Mendoza. And
Well, thank you, Chairman Ken Mejia-Beal, and I'm very excited that you are chairing one of my favorite counties, of course, that I feel like I'm a daughter of as well.
yes,
Some of my most amazing formative years were there in DuPage. My brother Joaquin, the one we've spoken about,
yes.
graduated from Downers Grove North.
Okay, very
Yep.
nice.
And yeah, I have like really amazing memories, and I'm always going to feel very super connected. A special place in my heart for DuPage County. So thank you for letting me participate, and thank you for your leadership in continuing the amazing work that has been done to date. I know it's going to be even bigger and better for Democrats in DuPage, now BluePage. Let's keep it that way.
That's right. We are. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. And don't forget, when you go to vote for Mendoza, because she pays our bills and we have a balanced budget. Those are the things to talk about. So thank you. Have a great evening.
Thanks,
Good night,
everybody.
everyone.
Take care. Love you all. Thank you.
Thank you.